Next, we're going to talk about factoring by grouping. Factoring by grouping is a very specific factoring strategy that we're going to use again later on, but we use it when a polynomial has 4 terms. And then something we're going to talk about later is that we still have to factor out a GCF if possible. That's always going to be our first step when we're factoring. So I want to take a look at these first 2 examples, which are already partially factored for us. So what I want you to notice is inside the parentheses is exactly the same. So we really only have 2 factors here right now, or 2 terms. This is term 1, and this is term 2. So if I'm looking at those as 2 terms, what they have in common is this x plus 3. So I can go ahead and factor that out because it's in both terms. So if I factor it out of the first term, I'm just left with x. And if I factor it out of the second term, I'm just left with that -2 or -2. Remember, what we have left when we factor out is put in parentheses, and so this is my factored form, x plus 3 times x minus 2. We could check this by distributing kind of in reverse, so this would be the x times x plus 3, which is right here, and this would be the -2 times the x plus 3, which is right here. So same thing with the next one. They both have this a plus b in common. So what that means is that we can go ahead and we can factor out that a plus b. So if I factor it out of the first one, I'm just left with this x right here. And if I factor it out of this one, I'm just left with this plus y. So this factors into a plus b times x plus y. So now we're going to take it one step further and completely factor these. So it's called factoring by grouping because that's what we're going to do. We're going to start by looking for a GCF. You can see that in the first one, my terms have nothing, all 4 of them don't have the same thing in common. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group the first 2 terms and group the second 2, making sure to leave this sign with the third term so I know if it's positive or negative. And then I'm going to factor each group separately. So I'm going to start by looking at x squared minus 4x. I can factor out an x, and that would leave me with x minus 4. Then I'll look at the next group. They have a positive y in common. So because it's positive, I'm going to put a plus there. And if I factor out that y, I'm left with x minus 4. So just like in the last examples, you can see that my parentheses are exactly the same, and I'm down to just 2 terms. So I can factor out that x minus 4 from both terms. I can factor it out of this one, and I can factor it out of this one. And what that leaves me with is this x and this plus y. So this factors into x minus 4 times x plus y. So same thing in the next one. I start by checking for a GCF, and there isn't one. So I'm going to group the first 2 terms and group the second 2. I'm going to start by factoring the first group. So what I can take out of there is just an x, and so that will leave me with 2x minus 5. Now in the second group, notice this is a minus sign, which means my leading coefficient is negative. So instead of factoring out a 3, I'm going to factor out a -3, which means, again, I have to put that minus sign there. And when I do that, that will change this to a positive 2x and a minus 5. So once again, my parentheses are exactly the same. That has to happen because then I can factor out that 2x minus 5. So if I factor it out of the first term, I'm just left with this x. And if I factor it out of the second term, I'm just left with this minus 3. So this factors into 2x minus 5 times x minus 3. So 2 more examples. These ones are, the first one is going to have a GCF we can factor out. So you'll notice that everything is even, so I can start by factoring out a 2, which will leave me with x squared minus 2x plus x minus 2. Now, just because I factored out a GCF doesn't mean I'm done, so I'm going to see if I can factor what's left by grouping. So in the first group, I can factor out an x, and that will leave me with x minus 2. In the second group, they have nothing in common, so this is the only time we want to factor out a 1. And because I'm factoring out a positive 1, because this is a positive term, I'll put a plus 1 there, and that will leave me with x minus 2. And I still have this 2 that I factored out at the very beginning. So now they both have this x minus 2 in common, so I can factor that out, and that leaves me with this x and this plus 1 in my second binomial. And again, I have the 2 that I factored out at the very beginning, needs to be part of my final answer. So this factors into 2 times x minus 2 times x plus 1. Now the last one does not have a GCF, so I'm going to start by grouping the first 2 terms and the last 2. In my first group, I can factor out a 3x, which will leave me with x plus 7. Now in my second group, again, my leading coefficient is negative, so instead of factoring out a 2, I need to factor out a negative 2. So that will leave me with x and plus 7 as well. So my parentheses are the same. I can factor out that x plus 7, and in the first term, it will leave me with this 3x. And in the second term, it will leave me with this minus 2. So this factors into x plus 7 times 3x minus 2.